Pedro and Alejandro have asked me to say a few words about forests, which is a great passion of mine. I'm a zoologist, and I'll just go by a Newtonian view of natural capital economy. I'll explain that as we go along, what I mean by that. But much of my life has been spent hanging around in the tops of large tropical forest trees. And that's not me, but actually it could be. And I used to spend a lot of time building walkways and so on. This gives you a new view of life. When scientists first started climbing in the tops of these trees, we were astounded at how much life was up there. I could get handfuls of new species. Some of them look like this. What is it? A leaf? A leaf with legs? It doesn't really matter what it is. It's unbelievable that evolution can create something like this. And our vision of conservation for the last 30 years, driven by many organizations, World Wildlife Fund represented, where are you? Somewhere here. Fantastic organization. I remember Max Nicholson, who helped to start it up. Our president of World Wildlife is here, Yolanda, and Peter Scott, you know, when they all set it up. And it gave us a view of nature, which was that the reason we should save these wonderful forests was because of the intrinsic existence value of biodiversity, and also, of course, for the communities, indigenous, extractivists and farmers who live in and around the forests. And the big problem, I've spent 35 years trying to do that, and the problem is it doesn't really work. Or we wouldn't have a problem with deforestation rates so high around the world. And the reason is, it is about money. Because no one will give me $1 billion for that bug, no matter how well I try and sell it. And it's billions of dollars that are ranged against forests all over the world in huge interest. So I realized I had to come out of the trees, and this is what I should be looking at. On the left-hand side, all the magic of biodiversity. And on the right-hand side, the magic of Magi. That's not very fair for Grupo Magi, but, you know, huge interests of money and banks that are pouring money into the conversion of forests for agriculture. That is a Latin American phenomenon. It's not the same in Africa, and it's not the same it is to some extent the same in Indonesia. So we should be looking at this interface, not the Canopy atmosphere interface, I thought. And so I spent a lot of time working with financial institutions in capital markets around the world, particularly London, to examine this interface and see how we could use money to be a force for good rather than bad in this situation. And this is my Newton problem. On the left-hand side, you have no force pushing outwards that's equal and opposite to the economic forces pushing inwards. That's one of the great dilemmas with these forests. So it's something we need to look at. So we need a new way to look at these forests. I don't know, some of you here may remember Bob Hope, a famous American comedian in the middle there. And I loved the road films that were made by Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, and others. And Bali was a turning point. It was our road. We're all on this long journey, a road to sustainability. But a key stepping stone on that road was Bali. And many people, many organizations, including my own, argued to include forests in the roadmap that led from Bali to where we are today in Mexico. And that was succeeded. Forests are now part of the evolving climate regime. And it's extraordinary how far we've gone in just a few years, because before Bali, forests were totally outside the regime. Most of the negotiators were from the energy sector and didn't understand what forests had to do with climate change at all. And in just a few years, forests have gone like in a horse race, from being the last horse in the race to being the favorite and the front runner. It's an extraordinary change. And that's all to do with the evolution of REDD+ and the carbon cycle and the opportunity to pay countries to stabilize their forest frontiers We don't know yet how that's exactly going to work, but if there is an agreement this week, it will be a massive step forward, in my view. So we see forests slightly differently now. A way of looking at them that I propose is to see them like eco-utilities, large pieces of green infrastructure that are vital for wealth creation and for sustaining life on this planet, not only in Amazonia, but also in the Congo Basin and the large forests of Southeast Asia. In the Convention on the UNFCCC, it's mainly seeing them in the carbon cycle. The smoke that goes into the atmosphere when forests are burned, but also the carbon that's taken out of the atmosphere as forests grow. And that's about a ton per hectare per year. That means these forests are taking out about 1 billion tons a year for free. And there's some other funny dilemmas. In my country, the previous government agreed to spend £15 billion on developing industrial carbon capture and storage. New machines to go on power stations to suck the CO2 out before it went into the atmosphere and pump it into the holes in the ground where we took the oil out of. 15 billion. No one has ever developed that technology. It's likely to cost somewhere between $100 to $500 a ton. And how much money did we give to forests which are taking 1 billion tons out of the atmosphere for free to help save forests? 300 million. There's something a little odd there going on, but I'm going to just leave that thought for you as to why that sort of decision is made. Well, so can we see forests as billion-dollar eco-utilities, and how would that drive our thinking in the future? That's something we can talk a little bit about today. But there's one thing that's very important. It's not just about carbon. Forests do, of course, much more than that. And the cycles, the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the biodiversity, the livelihoods they support are all equally important. And the idea of ecosystem services has come up, and can these be monetized? Can these create flows of money around the world for the ecosystem services that forests produce? What is their value to agriculture and to energy? Could it be the basis of a new kind of economy to see forests and green infrastructure in this way? I sometimes call this Virgilio's movie. Is Virgilio here still? No. It's a wonderful image that we've used around the world over the last few years to create this idea of how important the tropics are and forests for moving moisture around the earth. These forests are not the lungs of the earth. They are its beating heart, pumping water and heat around the earth. And if you look at where we are here in Central America and Amazonia, you can see how the water is pulled in, it goes around, hits up against the Andes, and then flows south in great plumes off to South Africa. We don't know very much about that cycle. Some of it's going up into the Caribbean, some may end up as far as Europe. But if you take out the Amazon, and there are models that have done that, and the Congo Basin and other areas, some interesting things happen. It looks like it could affect areas as far north as North America, but more likely, what you're seeing is an eco-utility that operates around the basin here. 9 countries, 1 Amazon, but its services are worldwide, and particularly down to La Plata, the big agricultural heartland of Latin America. So it raises some interesting questions. Just look at some of these figures. 8 trillion tons of water vapor evaporated each year out of the Amazon. That's moving around the continent and keeping the soy fields of Argentina going really well. So maybe the Argentinians should be paying money to the Amazonian states to keep the rain coming. That would raise some interesting political and legal implications. It's a huge, powerful mechanism. And we need to understand this, the political mechanisms and the funding mechanisms that it could generate. So we see perhaps, if you continue on this journey and this thinking, leading towards what might be called an emerging biosphere economy. And this is something that I'm working on with other academics around the world, particularly in Amazonia, funded by the UK government and others, to look at the impact of Amazonia on foods, on the 5 securities, not just 3. Climate, water, food, energy, and livelihoods. You can remember them on the palm of your hand, and they're really important for the whole region. And the problem is that the wheel of fortune is broken because the services of the forest are not included in the economy. And the people who maintain the services, the communities who live in and around the forest, are not rewarded for doing so. These impacts of change are now, not in the future. In 2005, there was a very big drought in Amazonia, and we thought, well, that'll never happen for many years. And this year, it's happened again, and is even worse. At the beginning of the year, we had some of the highest water levels recorded at Manaus, and this year, some of the lowest later on. Colombia has just suffered in the last few weeks of terrible rains and the biggest flooding, I think, in your country. We don't really know why this is happening. Scientists can't tell you whether it's caused by deforestation or climate change, but it is happening. And what we can be sure of, though, is that a more resilient forest, one that is not degraded over time, is probably going to lead to a more resilient economy. There have been big problems with this. A lot of the communities are suffering. The fish are dying on the banks, so are the cattle are dying on land. The soy barges couldn't get out of Mato Grosso. The fires causing airports to close and many people to go to hospital. There are real economic costs. So natural capital is an opportunity to create financial flows around the world in a new way and at a scale that's never been seen before. And who owns all this natural capital? I think this is another important political point. And the answer is, of course, countries or regions like Latin America and the Caribbean are the biggest owners of natural capital on the planet. This could change the geopolitical relationships between countries, because here is something that is providing a service the whole world needs. This provides an opportunity to move from aid to trade, and again, to create these financial flows based on the values of natural capital. But it carries many risks. Many, you will hear them in the negotiations here in Mexico. Many countries do not like the idea of paying for nature. Should there be a price on biodiversity? And what I would say to that is that the risks of going down this route are great. They are great. And we need strong safeguards, particularly for the communities. But I think the risks of not going down this route are greater if we do nothing. There's another risk out there. And this is where it connects between your world and mine. And that is that consumption is what's driving this around the world. Consumption patterns are changing very fast. And this is a headline in a local newspaper a year ago in my country. It just shows that there is a huge amount of awareness growing, and agriculture is something that we're really going to have a challenge about over the next 20 years. Someone is eating this eco-utility, and it's beef and soy and palm oil and timber, also oil, mining, and of course poverty. And it is spread right across the world. In my country, Europe is the largest importer of soy in the world, the second largest importer of palm oil. It goes into cosmetics, cakes, biscuits, everything that you see in the supermarkets, and nobody knows it's there. When you eat a big breakfast in Britain of bacon and sausages and eggs, you never think that the Amazon is sitting on your plate, because those chickens have been fed on soy, and the pigs have been fed on soy that have come from the Amazon. So we're all in this together and connected. The challenge of agribusiness and the drivers of deforestation are something that we're really going to have to look at, and we might discuss a little bit more. There are emerging risks and opportunities here for companies. I started up something a year ago called the Forest Footprint Disclosure Project with support of the British government. And the chairman of the Carbon Disclosure Project is sitting right here, James, and we modeled the Footprint Disclosure Project on the Carbon Disclosure Project, because as I say, it's not just about carbon. And this is a proxy for natural capital. And there are reputational risks, environmental risks, regulatory risks, earnings risks, all coming down the pipe to companies. And the smart ones will pay attention and change now and become the leaders of the future. We could talk a bit about that. So some ideas for Rio Plus 20, just to leave you with, is that I see forests as being, if you will, a proxy for a new kind of natural capital economy. It's a great way to understand how natural capital is included and underpins wealth creation worldwide. And so we should use it as an opportunity on the road to Rio to help people understand the importance of nature in the economy. Our language is often wrong. Words like biodiversity simply don't work in business very well. No big business accountant understands why they should have a bug on the balance sheet. I mean, that's just life. It's really difficult. So we should have a new language. Sustainability is even a difficult word because it helps us put the environment somewhere else. and not at the heart of our lives, not at the heart of business, not at the heart of government. It's something that's kind of a luxury, nice to have, and that's totally wrong. We need to change that language and get it centered. So here's 3 things for policy, business, and civil society. Maybe we should look towards having a natural capital convention in Rio. I don't know what it would be in it, but it might be something to do with water, agriculture, and energy. We have the development agenda, the climate agenda, and the deserts agenda, the biodiversity agenda, all separate. This is crazy. Our conventions are not able to make decisions quick enough to take the action that we need. And that is partly a failure of democracy, I think. Because governments, democratically elected governments, cannot impose on their electorates the changes that are necessary, because they get voted out. It's that old phrase of turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And that's the politician's dilemma. Whereas in more totalitarian states or command and control states like China, moving ahead very fast, planting more trees than anyone else, going into renewable energy fast. I'll come back to that at the end. So politicians need to lead the way. What could we do in Rio that would lead the way? Think of what amazing leadership came out of Rio to produce not 1 but 3 conventions. We shouldn't be celebrating Rio and looking back. Exactly as Marina said this morning, we should be looking forward and being equally challenging, as inspirational, as visionary. What would it be? Business. Think pink. Now, pink stands for Proactive Investment in Natural Capital. And I published a little book in Nagoya at the CBD, which was the pink book, all about biodiversity. And everybody kept saying, why is it pink? It should be green. And I said, no, because it's about proactive investment in natural capital. And we looked at all the investments around the world that were going to help biodiversity. So I think business should be thinking pink in the future. And give you one action point, having natural capital accounts in business. The World Bank at Nagoya called for it to be done at governmental level, but why shouldn't business take account of the way it uses natural capital and report on it? For civil society, I think, and we should listen to what Kirsty has to say about this particularly, because the new media is something we've been talking about a lot this morning. What is the role of the new media in making things happen at Rio? Connecting people, connecting the world. And I invented a new word just a couple of weeks ago when we were thinking of this, because there's something in between democracy and totalitarianism that is evolving. And I call it the internocracy, which is the internet being used as a new kind of way of connecting civil society and putting pressure on government. It's fantastically powerful. I'll just give you an example that happened this week, which nearly prevented me from getting here. All the flight controllers in Spain wanted to go on strike. But if they went on strike, they knew they would lose their jobs, because they're not allowed to go on strike because of the law. So they got on their mobile phones and used the internocracy to say, we're all going to take the day off sick. And they all reported around to each other, and nobody went to work and said, we're off sick today. And they brought the entire European airspace to a halt. I'm not saying that was a good thing, but it shows the power of the internocracy in bringing about immediate and quick change. It's something new in our society. So I'll just leave you with those thoughts. 3 things to think of. I know there'll be many more, and we can carry on some of these ideas in our discussion. Thank you very much.